Time to catch up with our regular Thursday contributor. She is the New South Wales Liberal Senator Concetta Fierravanti-Wells. Connie, good morning.
Good morning, Stephen.
I want to talk about defence with you in a moment, completely separate to the War Memorial, but the head of ASIO has warned that ideologically motivated extremism is on the rise, but religious extremism remains our most serious terror threat. I would have thought they were both one and the same thing.
Well, Stephen, 2 points here. Of course, recently the ASIO changed the language that it uses to talk about violent threats that ASIO needs to counter, because the previous labels that they were using were no longer fit for purpose and simply wrong. Take, for example, somebody like Tarrant in Christchurch. He was immediately branded right-wing, yet his manifesto clearly stated that he was a communist, then an anarchist, then a libertarian, and then an eco-fascist or a eco-national socialist. What ASIO focuses on, it doesn't investigate people solely because of their political views or their religious views. So therefore, when you start looking at labels like left and right, it often distracts from what is the real nature of the threat. But ASIO's focus is on the threat of violence. Now, we know that many of the views of extremist groups are appalling, but as I said, ASIO's view is whether those actions are going to result in what can be described as either religiously motivated violent extremism or ideologically motivated violent extremism. They're only umbrella terms, but there may be circumstances where ASIO calls out more specific threats, which more accurately describe the sort of activities that they're talking about.
Which I imagine is important in the sense that the opposition has obviously tried to take potshots at the government about the so-called rise of right-wing extremism and try to obviously link centre-right politics with extreme right ideologies. And you can understand the politics behind that. But from ASIO's perspective, they need to try and stand above that and actually stamp out the problem.
Well, as I said, ASIO's focus is on the threat of violence. It doesn't mean that it looks at people or investigates people solely because of their political views or solely because of their religious views. The important thing is whether this does then ultimately result in violence. But I think that the whole issue of what ASIO is doing has really raised the concerns about branding of people. I've been raising this issue for a couple of years now, and I know that on the political front, people have continued to criticise those of us who are conservative, basically forgetting their history and forgetting that National Socialism or Nazis have their antecedents in communist philosophy. One only needs to go back in history to know that fascism is not right-wing. They are National Socialists, and that's the name. Socialism is a left-wing ideology with its antecedents in communism. And I think Margaret Thatcher succinctly summed it up nicely when she said socialism and fascism are the two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, I think, 100% right. Now, as somebody that has a focus on defence and foreign affairs and particularly the funding of those particular portfolios, I have been critical of the methodology of our defence spending in the sense that we tend to do it based on what we can afford rather than what we need. We now see that defence costs around $122 million a day. But there's an argument from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute that we're spending too much on contractors, which may be actually draining our effective defence spending.
Well, I think, Stephen, successive governments have generally pursued a policy of building in Australia to benefit the Australian workforce and Australian context. Now, whether a decision is made by a particular government to build in Australia or to buy overseas are really a matter for that government. Now, contractors are an important component of any defence project to deliver the capabilities that we might want. Now, whether they're bought off the shelf or made in Australia. Now, let's not forget that many Australian SMEs are an integral part of delivering different components of a large project and delivering that final product. So now, of course, we're seeing a debate as to whether we should be building our own submarines or whether, it would have been more cost-effective to buy them off the shelf. Now, that's the matter for government. So whatever that decision is, whenever that decision is made or whatever the basis is for that acquisition decision, irrespective of it, its execution will involve contractors to deliver that capability to a greater or a lesser extent.
Yeah, it's always going to be one of those conundrums, and, I know we look at a percentage of GDP as the benchmark for our defence spending, but as I said to your colleague Jim Molan last week, if you need 5 tanks, you need 5 tanks. You can't say, well, we'll only build 3.5 because that's where the budget stops. But it's always going to be a problem for any successive government, as you say. Connie, good to talk to you. We'll catch up again next week.
Okay, thanks very much.
Senator Concetta Fierravanti-Wells, New South Wales Liberal Senator and regular contributor to the program, back with us next week, 7:17 past 7.